Now we're going to slice and print our first model. Open Flash Print, and on the File menu, click File, then Examples, and then 20 millimeter box. So we have a simple model to work with. On my mouse pad, I'm using 2 fingers, sliding up and down to zoom in and out on the object. And on my MacBook, if I hold down the Control key and click 1 finger and drag, I can rotate around the model. Looking at the bottom, you can see that it's solid blue in color. That indicates that the model is flat on the build surface, which is what we want. There are lots of options on the side. We'll be looking at those later in other lessons, but for now, we're going to keep the defaults and slice the model. So slicing means that we're going to convert this virtual model into layers or slices that the printer will then lay down layer by layer until the model is finished. Before I do anything though, I'm always going to double check in the bottom left-hand corner to make sure that I have the proper printer and modes set. If I click on the icon and look at the machine types, you'll see that there's a Finder 3 and a Finder. The Finder 3 is a newer model of the Finder, and that is not what we're using. We're using the older model of the Finder. And if you have a Finder Lite, you would use the same older Finder model. So it should say Finder 0.4 normal mode. And the 0.4 is the diameter of the nozzle. So I'll click Start Slicing. Again, I'm going to keep all the default settings here, and I'm going to click Slice. And then click Slice Preview. The first thing to notice here in the upper right-hand corner, the program gives us an estimate of how long the print will take, 7 minutes. It also estimates the amount of material that will be used. In this case, 2.18 grams. Generally speaking, you purchase filament in 1 kilogram rolls, so you know how much you paid for 1 kilogram, and using some basic math, you can figure out exactly how much it costs in material to print this model. On the bottom of the screen, there are 2 sliders. I'm going to zoom in a little bit so we can look more closely at the model. And if I zoom in enough, you can see the layers, right? You see those lines going across. And the top slider says layers. And if I move it back and forth, you can actually see the model being printed layer by layer by layer. You'll notice that by default, there is a solid bottom, and the interior is mostly hollow. This is called an infill pattern, and most 3D prints will be made up mostly of empty space with just a little bit of interior support. As I slide layer by layer up to the top, you can see the infill ends there, and then one top layer is printed, then another top layer, and then another top layer. So in this case, there are 3 top layers. And the bottom slider, if I use that, that shows the steps within each layer. So if I go to the beginning, that's the start of that last layer. And you can see as I slide along, the printer prints the outside wall, and then it will move across diagonally and lay down that very top layer. You can also notice, probably, as I'm moving the sliders, that this funny looking code on the side is scrolling. That's the actual file that we're creating using this slicer. We're creating what's called a G-code file. You can see up at the top, the default file name right now is 20 millimeters underscore box dot GX, and the GX is a type of G-code file. And you notice that all of the lines of code begin with G, or many of them do at any rate. So as I slide through, you can see each movement of the tool head is determined by a set of X and Y coordinates in the G code. And then after a layer is done, then the build plate will lower down a certain amount in the Z direction and continue with the next layer and so forth until the print is done. Okay, now we're satisfied with that. So now all that remains is to save the file to a USB drive or SD card, depending on what type of machine you have. The regular Finder will have a USB drive slot on the side, and if you have a Finder Lite, then you will have an SD card slot on the side of the machine. So I'll click this icon, 20 millimeter box. I like to add the print time to the file name, 7 minutes, so I know how long it's going to take. Choose, in this case, I have a USB drive, and you notice it's adding the GX file extension. And if I check my USB drive, you can see that the file is there. Now we'll eject the USB drive and plug it into the side of the machine and use the same steps that we did for the 3D test squares to print the file. Turn on the machine, heat up the nozzle, load the filament, plug in the USB drive or the SD card, and tap on build, and the model will start printing.